questions from journalists, TV viewers and invited guests. Well, during today's event, President Putin said he'd not yet met Syria's ousted President Assad, but does plan to do that. He also denied Assad's defeat was a defeat for Russia. He also said he's prepared for talks and compromises over the future of Ukraine, but that the Ukrainian authorities should also be prepared to compromise. Well, our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg was at that news conference and asked Vladimir Putin if he thinks he's been successful as Russia's leader.
Exactly 25 years ago, Boris Yeltsin resigned office, and he handed over the power to you, and he told you, stay on guard. 25 years later, would you say you have succeeded in it? Because from our part, we see significant losses during the so-called special military operation that you have declared. We see Ukraine soldiers in the Kursk region. You criticize the NATO expansion and enlargement, but there is now a greater NATO presence at the Russian borderline. Sweden and Finland, we have demographic and economic problems. What do you think? Have you succeeded? Yes, I believe I have. I believe we have moved away from the brink of an abyss, because what happened to Russia before that and after that was leading us to a complete and total loss of our sovereignty. And without sovereignty, Russia cannot exist as an independent state.
Just a small part of that news conference. Let's talk to the Washington Post journalist and author of Putin's People, Catherine Belton. And Catherine, welcome here to the programme. I know you listened to large parts of that marathon news conference. What were your major takeaways?
I think actually the biggest takeaway for me was the beginning, when he was facing a lot of questions about the economy. It's clear citizens and all the people are worried about rising prices. Inflation has been soaring. It's now at 9%, essentially as a result of sanctions and Putin's wartime spending spree on the military. And this is involving basic foodstuffs such as potatoes, which are now up nearly 80% on the year. And Putin, though he's trying to project this image, as he was to your correspondent just now, of everything being fine and everything being stable, he did admit that inflation is now alarming, and he's facing really growing pressures on the economy.
And of course, interest rates, I think, are at 21%. How big a problem is this likely to be into 2025, the economy?
I think it's the biggest risk that he's facing. Yes, he is facing growing losses now on the battlefield. I think you had General Kellogg, President-elect Trump's nominated special envoy for Ukraine, saying that Russia is currently facing losses of 1.2 thousand men per day on the battlefield. But the economy is really the biggest risk for him, because you've even seen his closest allies, members of his inner circle, such as Igor Sechin and Sergei Chemezov, his best friends from St. Petersburg, essentially, claim that the interest rates are so sky high that he could be facing bankruptcies in the economy next year. Russia has very high corporate debt levels, and at some point this isn't going to be sustainable for him. Right now, he thinks he's winning, and he is, because Ukraine is undermanned, undersupplied with weapons, and just hasn't been given adequate amounts of weapons, and they think that Trump is going to cut aid. But if Western aid is sustained for another year, then Putin is going to face a much trickier position.
Well, you take me to exactly where I wanted to go, because you touched on it. The losses now are horrific in terms of the main battle lines. Also, Donald Trump may or may not throw him a lifeline by trying to force a settlement on Ukraine. But if he doesn't try to force that settlement and you have those losses, how sustainable is that for Putin?
Yeah, it's just going to get more and more difficult for him. Because I mean, like I mentioned, the central bank has been battling with inflation. It's been trying to rein it in, and yet the prices keep rising because of sanctions are making it more and more expensive to import goods. And Putin has raised the spending on the military to really very high levels. The amount of spending on the defense sector next year is going to be a record $126 billion. There's a labor force shortage because of the war and the round-the-clock military output, and it's just and the fact that interest rates are now at 21%, and the central bank tomorrow is due to convene a meeting where they're about to go to 23%, and yet inflation is still soaring, just shows that their efforts to rein in inflation are just not working. And you also saw Putin facing more and more questions about the level of losses as well on the battlefield, which just show growing anxiety. And you have this sniping now among the elite. You have infighting breaking out, which also adds to the sense of insecurity. I think Putin's probably fine to keep going for another year, but if how the West can sustain the level of aid to Ukraine, then this time next year he's going to be facing a much more precarious position.
A broader final thought then, because you touched on the economy, you touched on Ukraine. Russia is also now being forced to leave their bases in Syria. As we get to the end of 2024, is he in a stronger or weaker position than when he was at the start of this year?
That's a difficult question to answer because, yes, on the face of it, it looks like he's doing very well. He himself said we have economic growth of 4% this year. It's much higher than in Europe. And also, he's sort of riding high too from the election win of Donald Trump, who he hopes and believes, at least according to Trump's rhetoric so far, that the supply of weaponry to Ukraine is going to get cut. He's looking at the West, seeing the disarray in European capitals where we've seen a vote of no confidence in France and in Germany too. So he clearly believes he's winning right now on the battlefield, and he is, because as we mentioned, Ukraine has been undersupplied. It doesn't have enough weaponry to battle Russia's advances. So at the moment, he thinks he's going to be able to ride it out, especially given the change in the political situation in the West. But if somehow Trump believes that Putin is not entering negotiations in good faith, and Trump may find some steel to actually increase weapons to Ukraine and combat the failings of the Biden regime and counter them. And if maybe Europe decides to send the $300 billion in reserves from the Russian central bank that it seized over Ukraine's invasion, then Putin's going to be facing a very different picture. So at the moment, yes, he's winning, but it could all flip by this time next year.
Catherine, fascinating analysis. Thank you so much.
To be seen. Here's a clip from President Putin's marathon press conference today, in which an NBC News reporter, a British journalist, attempts to pin President Putin down. I think you'll appreciate the question and the response. Chris, number 5.
Mr. President, you have failed to reach the objectives of your special military operation. Large numbers of Russians have died, including a general assassinated here in Moscow this week. And the leader of Syria, who you supported, has been overthrown. Mr. President, when you face President-elect Trump, you will be the weaker leader. How do you propose to compromise? What are you going to offer?
You asked what we can offer, or I can offer, to the President-elect Trump when we meet. I do not know when we're going to meet, because he does not speak about that. I haven't spoken to him for more than 4 years now. I am prepared for that conversation at any time. I will be prepared to hold a meeting as well, if he so desires. You said that this conversation will take place where I'll be in a weakened state. I'm of a different opinion. I think that Russia became much stronger over the past 2 or 3 years. Russia today is in such a state that we have been trying to achieve. It has become stronger. It has become a truly sovereign country.
Mearsheimer, is Russia stronger today, politically, militarily, culturally, economically, than it was 3 years ago?
Yes. And General Cavoli, who is the Supreme Allied Commander Europe, has said exactly that the Russian army is in much better shape today than it was when the war started in February 2022. And of course, the Ukrainian army is in much worse shape. And that's why the Russians are on the verge of victory in Ukraine. So I don't know how anybody can say that Russia is in a weak position and that Putin will be in a weak position when he bargains with Donald Trump. I think it's Trump who's playing the bad hand. It's not Trump's fault. He's inherited this terrible situation. But Putin is in the driver's seat, in my opinion. And Putin will drive a really hard bargain, which is going to make it extremely difficult for Trump to reach some sort of agreement with Putin that he can sell. Trump can sell in the West.
You and I have talked about the significance of the Oreshnik missile, and Putin's pretty proud of it. With a little bit of a smirk on his face, he dared the West to shoot it down, cut number 16.
There is no chance to shoot down these Oreshnik missiles. Well, if those Western experts you mentioned think so, that Oreshnik can be shot down, we suggest they, and those in the West and the United States, who pay them for their analysis, conduct some kind of technological experiment, a high-tech duel of the 21st century. Let them name some object, let's say in Kiev, concentrate all their air defense and missile defense forces there, and we will hit it with Oreshnik and see what happens. We are ready for such an experiment. Is the other side ready?
I guess we're not going to take him up on that.
He's being very playful here, and
Yes.
he can be very playful because, as I said a few minutes ago, he's in the driver's seat, and he knows that. He knows we are in deep trouble in Ukraine, and he knows that the Oreshnik missile is going to get through no matter what, and therefore he can poke us in the eye.
I want to ask you 1 or 2 questions about NATO.